My name is Gregory Allen McCowan, GregoryAllen McCown, Texas ID 28632893. Now, my Michigan State identification was 800-410, or 8,410. So here's October 10th, 3:45 Central Standard Time. October 4th, 2025. So 10-4, good buddy. My Michigan State student number of 800-410, or 800,410, is that it would come around to about 10-4. Good buddy, we read you. Just a play on numbers. But in that regard, I'm reading the Riot Act. This is the Lord God for reading the Riot Act. I sanction no violence. I order no violence. And I'll be responsible for nobody's violence. You take that responsibility on yourself. Now, when I'm the president, that's a little bit different. You have a right to make me president, to assume your acts, to be violent, in self-defense. Now, when Donald Trump sits there and says, I'm going to fire those generals that do not surrender to me, that is the most unheard of act. Generals who have been there since 1985, Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, George Walker Bush, Barack Obama, then to Donald Trump, who couldn't say it himself in his first term, then Joe Biden, and then now Donald Trump says, if they don't surrender, I'm going to fire them. 40 years general, and he's going to say, I can destroy you. That's atrocious. These are the people that are supposed to defend the United States. And he won't even let them defend themselves against his authority, that he can destroy them. That is no political office or intent of the Constitution president to say he can destroy those in their self-defense rights, that he can destroy them himself. Somehow you get the hint that Donald Trump is kidnapping the United States. Other than that, let me get back into the story here. I got some messages. I tried it before and I tested it, but I'm going to present it if it's possible to be read. I got John Holt's book here, which I'll read the script associated with the prophecy. Century 3, Quatrain 3. This is the receipt of my receiving the book. Now I have to, I tested it earlier, I have to angle it so that the light doesn't fade out, the light shading of the print. And the light shading of the print still gets faded out. So that you would have to stop the video and have some kind of alternative method to read the script in a manner that would therefore you can observe. Otherwise, it's very faint. And I can make a picture and accentuate the paint. But this is what John Hogue's prophecy said in relationship to that prophecy. Near, far, the failure of two great debonaires. That was Gregory Al McCowan and Brian Keith Schmittler. We failed. Not unexpected, already predicted. Brian ran off when David Koresh was murdered in Texas, calling himself Jesus, and then Gregory's calling himself the Son of God. I was going to be attacked. Well, that's exactly what happened in the preceding months of May and June 1993 when I was attacked by the landlord and I survived. Siege warfare. I was in a residence that he wanted to kill me in, and I stopped him. But I knew what he was about to do and how he was going to do it, so I could prepare to stop him, and I did. So, anyways, oh, what a dear loss. In the next line. I'm sorry, that's the third line. After me and Brian split, he's followed me for 6 years because he saw the throne of God on my thumbnails and followed me. But after David Koresh was assaulted, he figured I was going to be assaulted, and all he had to do was walk away, and that's exactly what happened. Now, the next line, which will happen unexpectedly between April and March. Now, the receipt that I sold you was 8:59 p.m. of Dalton Bookstore buying the Nostradamus book after sunset of April 1st for the Jewish calendar and before the secular calendar of midnight, which would be the next day. So that Nostradamus wrote between April and March what would happen unexpectedly. Well, at least Nostradamus had me collecting John Hogue's book on the exact moment of time, unexpectedly. It wasn't understood by myself as Nostradamus describing, he didn't do it purposely. For him, it would be an unexpected discovery that he would buy it at this exact point in time. So April 1st would be the Jewish New Day at sunset on March 31st, and March 31st, the secular day, would be midnight for April 1st. So that I was still in March in the secular calendar, but I was after sunset of the April 1st when I bought the book. That's the unexpected moment in time of discovering the prophecies of Nostradamus. Now, what a dear loss of course, Brian K. Schmittler separating himself, but for two debonair great ones. Now, this is the story picking up of Gregory Allen McCowan and Dennis Lowers, who by land and sea will assist all parties. Well, guess what? I'm going to be president, and Dennis is going to be vice president. And the story of the discovery of universal gear. That's going to be another video. I can't go into this at this time. I've already gone into that story in my book volumes, of which you can access either by Houston Chronicles, which the story is listed in, or you can go to the Sixth Circuit Court in Public Records, Article 4 of the Constitution, which I listed all my files from Florida into Texas. So that anything that I did write and send out was always to the Sixth Circuit Court in conjunction as an address. Under Article 4, judicial records should be shared with all the states, and of course, all the states would be the state citizen legislatures, which would be all the citizens of the United States have the right to access those records. Now, it's a lot of reading. But it's only proof of my presence from Florida into Texas that I continued delivery of those writings to their location in Michigan, that they first accessed and demanded what happened in your event in Michigan that caused you to become a fugitive. Well, I explained to them, you couldn't convict me even if you gave me a trial. So why wouldn't I flee? And of course, the story goes, and I wrote, that the governors couldn't extradite me without a trial in another state. And nobody wanted to see a trial that they denied in Michigan to be exercised in another state to make them look bad. So extradition was impossible from Florida or even Texas. They didn't want another trial on the original charges in Michigan that were frivolous, to say the least. They just tried to kidnap me as if I was some ignorant that they could dispose of That wasn't going to happen. I wrote a personal letter to the judge previously, and in that personal letter to the judge is the only reason why she said, you know what they want to do? They want me to kidnap you right now. That was July 11th when Timothy McVeigh was taken off into being executed, and they wanted to take me the same day to have my freedom executed with Timothy McVeigh as if I was guilty. And she let me go and said, you come back here in 2 days. And I said, yes, yeah, you betcha I will. Kiss her goodbye. There's no way I was going to lose my freedom as if I was guilty of Timothy McVeigh, even if Timothy McVeigh even wasn't guilty himself. The Federals blew that building up, and not one Federal was in the building when it blew up, because they blew the building themselves. And Timothy McVeigh was made the scapegoat. There should have been at least a dozen agents dead in the building, but there wasn't one. They blew the building, and they made Timothy McVeigh a scapegoat. And then they murdered him. And I was supposed to be kidnapped in the court of the Sixth Circuit Court on June 11th, 2001, at the time that Timothy McVeigh was going to be executed. I was to be taken in captive, my freedom destroyed, in the same government conspiracy of fraud being committed on Timothy McVeigh that was committed on me. Only because of that judge saying, I'll give you 2 days, you come back, goodbye. They didn't have a case against me, and she knew it. So, while I become a fugitive out of Michigan, I'm going to return the President of the United States. Talk about a prodigal son story. To flee a fugitive and to return the President of the United States. So I didn't have any fear of extradition from any other state, because they'd have to have a trial in that state of what was the case in Michigan, and Michigan didn't have a case against me. They didn't want to have their dirty laundry presented in any other extradition case of a trial of another state. And that was the end of the story there. But from their requesting information in 2006, I continued to send all my letters that I wrote to the American people to that Sixth Circuit Court, so that you would have the privilege by the Article 4 judicial records among states to access every one of my writings. So if I don't illustrate, which I tried to do with that receipt, that I actually bought the Nostradamus book exactly as predicted, and Nostradamus, to crediting me, is saying he did it unexpectedly, that I was ignorant that I was walking into the moment of time, the exact moment of time between April 1st at sunset for the Jewish time at 8:59 p.m. I bought the books before the secular time of March 31st into April 1st. And that was the exact moment of time that Nostradamus predicted I would receive John Hogue's book of my own word. Now, the failure of the two debonair ones, that was Brian Keith Schmittler running off because of the killing of David Koresh in April of 1993, and Brian just, I'm out of here. They're coming to kill you. Certainly they did. And I survived that. Got dragged out by Detroit police officers out of Motor City sign after surviving attempted murder. But the next two images who assist all parties would be the Lord God Almighty and, of course, Dennis Lowers as my vice president to assist all parties in the coming war when I become president, and he'll be my vice president. You don't have nothing to worry about Dennis Lowers. He looks like Donald Trump, but you got nothing to worry about him. He's as true blue American as I could ever designate an American. He is like the exact opposite of Trump. Trump may be all English, is a king of treason, and Dennis looks like Donald Trump, and he's a true blue American. And he's the owner of the gold machine of the Universal Gear. So he's not going to interrupt my way making American wealthy by his authority. He's just going to make sure we get our dues for copyright and patent rights, and America can feel free in their newfound wealth. So from the failure of two that were together, and me and Brian Keith Schmittler were together 6 years, and then there's a prophecy that after 6 years he could go free, and I washed Brian Keith Schmittler's feet before he fled. It's like, you got nothing to be guilty about with the Lord God Almighty. And I washed his feet to show that I served him those 6 years. And he was gone. But there'll come a time where my long relationship with Dennis Lowers from 1980 and 1978, 1980 at Michigan State University will come back. And these would be the two men that will assist all parties. Now that's assist. Assist what? If I'm involved in a world war, Dennis is in control of the universal gear that I redesigned by McMeer Creations at Motor City Sign that is the rod of iron over all nations. And here I was at Universal Gear. Dennis called me in and said, I want you to file out an application for employment. What the hell? I didn't ask for this. I never requested any assistance from Dennis. And he was ordering me to do this. So I looked at the universal gear and wow, I was a mechanical design engineer. This is a weapon. This is like, I had previously been at Parliament Design in Troy, Michigan. And on the wall, they had a cutout of a jet engine. And I took a look at that. And conceptually, because I was in my Michigan State University physics training, I could comprehend what was happening through the cutout for the jet operations of the engine to happen. When I got into universal gear, I said, oh my God, this is a weapon. So I filled out the application, handed it to him, and then he made a call, and somebody came up and gave him back April. Here's Natalie Merrill and Dennis Lowers without their child, and somebody drove up and dropped off April and gave April back to Natalie and Dennis. And I said, holy shit, you think I kidnapped that bitch? Just to make a fabrication for me to get an employment in Universal Gear? On April 1st, I told Brian, we're getting the hell out of here. I'm not going into any employment to be accused of kidnapping my friend's daughter just to be employed. But I got the catalog and the knowledge of the nuclear ballistic railgun, the next jet engines and missile rockets, rotating armored shield, space jet fighters. It's like, I'm out of here, guys. Goodbye. Dennis didn't see me April 1st. I wasn't going into work. I was getting the hell out of Dodge. He got his daughter back, and that was, as far as I was concerned, that was the only purpose for me to fill out the application, and I was gone. And I still never begged him to be employed at any of his facilities. He gave me some work later during Air Doctor. I'll have a shirt of Air Doctor on me in the future, but this is Little Caesars for now, 1997. Anyways, the fact is that from that moment on, I knew the mechanical device, the weapons superiority of the United States. Funny thing was that when I was a little boy, I was pushing universal gear as a lawnmower because as the wheels spin in the universal gear construction, it helps the blade go faster. That as the wheels are rotating, the blades would spin faster to cut the grass. I was pushing universal gear from a young age. Then later in 1988, I'd be pushing universal gear in research development at Motor City Sign. So I had two moments of pushing universal gear. One cutting grass on my parents' lawn, and two pushing universal gear later at Motor City Sign and development of research of weapons. Nothing like coincidence. But the fact is that I didn't get arrested by my friend by going into work April 1st to say that you only kidnapped my daughter under extortion to get to work. No, I didn't. Didn't ask you for work. Didn't request work. You requested me to fill out the application. I had nothing to do with it. And after the application, he got his daughter back. I was out of the state of Florida. He never saw me then. But he understood that I was being framed under false pretext of requesting work that I never asked him for. But under the circumstances, I discovered the weapon to destroy the kidnappers. Only because they forced me to do that, to come into Universal Gear, fill out that application, get that catalog of Universal Gear, and then, understanding the circumstances, escape captivity of being arrested under false pretext of kidnapping the daughter of my friend, which I didn't do. And I was gone. His daughter was rescued, and I rescued myself. Brian himself was being kidnapped by Circle K. 4 blacks came in, robbed him, stole $100. Later, the blacks said, "We didn't steal any money, he stole it." I had to write out an entire witness to the court before we left to tell them by my witness and Brian Keith Schmittler what witness, there's two witnesses, Brian didn't steal $100. In other words, if I went into Universal Gear, I was going to be kidnapped, and then Brian was going to be arrested. We were both going to fail. As the prophecy says, we were both going to fail. Eventually, that happened, but we escaped from Florida because I wrote on an entire essay. And we went to the court and deposited and said because Brian is no longer associated with Circle K, he doesn't have to witness. And I witnessed that he didn't steal the $100. And that the only violence that could have possibly occurred for the loss of $100 was on those four black men. And Brian had another witness, but we couldn't access the identification of the women even if we stayed around. So it's like he's no longer responsible because he's no longer a Circle K employee to witness the robbery, and that I witnessed that Brian did not steal $100 from Circle K. We're gone. I escaped kidnapping. Brian escapes arrest. They looked over the papers that I had in my possession of the copies, and they were discussing whether they could extradite us back to the state of Florida. But they'd have to have a trial in Ohio over the issue. And it's like, I handed Brian $420 from my pocket to his pocket to say that I can remain in this jail cell, but you're going to take the money and go. And that's exactly what he did. He got his car back, went back to Michigan, started his life again, while I was still 3 more weeks in Lima City, Allen County, Ohio, as the Lord God Almighty, and I tormented them. How about that? They just threw me out in the street and said, get out of here. We don't want you here. I guess you don't want to have the Son of God in a prison torturing you to death. A living hell. Anyways, that being the case, we go off into the future. Now, I'm not going to show the video of all these events that I described. Century 9, Quatrain 12. Hermas and Diane by the lake, many little silver pieces. Now, I could show a picture of Columbus Art Glass, 3518 GE Drive, Tyler, Texas, where I made a stained glass mirror and stamped it December 4th, 1982, of my birthday. sending the picture to my parents as a gift to my brother, and Stephen's holding the mirror, and Dwayne standing by his side, and my father's holding it up with his hand, all proud of my capability of producing what amounted to the design of an atomic warhead. And you don't want me to show you that, but that's exactly what it was. I sent them the atomic warhead. My graduation from Michigan State University. Anyways, that was just the beginning of my engineering, and that was 1982, saying, here, I'll give you an atomic warhead design. And send it back to the family. There you go. But that was just 1982. Like, guess what? I can artistically create in stained glass mirror the design of an atomic warhead. Now that's just the artistic impression that was created from my I would have graduated in 1982 from 1978, but you know, the Princeton student that came around and said he created an atomic warhead for his graduation thesis, and he was anti-proliferation and nuclear war. Of course, I also am anti-proliferation and nuclear war. So any nuclear secrets that I had understood from Michigan State University, I had to keep secret to myself. And of course, God called me out and said, not only are you going to keep them secret, I want to make sure you keep them secret. You're not even going to be attending the university to graduate. By 1982, my graduation design and stained glass mirror was an atomic warhead. Out of stained glass art in Columbus Art Glass in Tyler, Texas. So it's like, damned if you do and damned if you don't. That's why you were called out from Michigan State University, because you damn well were a nuclear engineer. Well, by the time I got around to March 30th, 1987, that was 7 years exactly after I received my 3 red dots, which I showed Dennis. when he visited me in 301 Snyder Phillips. And I showed him the 3 red dots, and I showed him the setting sun, which he came in the evening. Perfect time to see the triangulation of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. And I said, that's royalty, and God has designated me to be his son. I didn't fully accept it. I wanted to go on in my presumption of life, and God deemed it otherwise. He said, you're leaving Michigan State University. That was the end of that story. But at least Dennis saw my 3 red dots on my right-hand thumbnail, saw the planets in the sky as Nostradamus prophesied that I wouldn't read for another 17 years for the event. But he had my statement right before him that this is the signet of royalty by Nostradamus' own claim that I read at that time, and the signature of deity. Excuse me. So personally, I did not make much issue out of those 3 red dots on my thumbnail to anybody. And if there's only one person that I needed to show, it was Dennis Lowers, and he came and he seen it. And that was the confirmation of Century 3, Quatrain 3 of Nostradamus. that we would be the two that would assist all parties. Now, one, Dennis Flowers is a great administrator. And let me tell you, anybody fucking with him is stepping on my toes. Because I'll be the commander in chief, and I know war better than anybody else in America. No one's going to supersede my authority. In fact, I'm going to trash that White House and level it to the ground to show that White House is not superseding me in the authority of God on this earth. Nostradamus has me painted in another mural creating a new capital. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. There will never again be another asshole in the White House holding me in contempt when there won't be a White House for an asshole to exist in. And that's how much I despise that building. The building I despise just as much as the Capitol on the other side. At the time of Abraham Lincoln being killed, that building was created as the supreme authority over the United States, murdering the president. Well, they couldn't murder me in 45 years, and there's another building going to be leveled. And if the state capitals know anything what's good for them, they'll understand my Constitution of George Washington to save their life. And if they are just a bunch of freaking cowards that sold their souls to the Jewish benefactors, they're going to die with the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, one of the things that I want to present that is confluence of events that I'd have to pull out Nostradamus' book here, make sure I read this perfectly. And I know exactly the verse I want to read in Century 9, Quatrain 12. Now, as I wanted to show, if it didn't get specifically visually recognize of the day that I actually received the book exactly on time. It was Century 3, Quatrain 2 for the Sixth Seal, just a verse before. Anyways, Century 9, might be a little difficult to find here. I haven't delineated it by any of my leaflets. All right. Okay, there it is. Crack open Nostradamus' prophecies. John Hogue. I got it written here. Let me take a spyglass. This was a big moment in time for me. April 1st, 1997. Mirror of Plant City, Florida, October 26, 1986. I actually wrote 8:30 a.m. In other words, this is already into the next day when I discovered this verse. And I started writing acknowledgments of time in the book when I discovered the prophecies. So here's April 1st. Now remember, this was the book that I've just purchased, sunset of March 31st, which would be April 1st in the Jewish calendar, before March, secular time, 12 midnight, that I purchased the book at 8:59 or 8:58 from the store. When I walked out of that store with that Nostradamus book, there was a Jewish woman that was going berserk, walking square circles around me. Anyways, so here I am staying up all night, going through this book and reading prophecies, and April 1st, which would be past midnight of the secular schedule, 8:30 a.m. 8:30, 8:30 a.m. reading. Mirror of Plant City, Florida, October 26, 1986. Page 322. Another reference to another prophecy association, I guess. But note, page 137, Century 1 Quatrain 88, page 322 through 3, Century 4 Quatrain 29, and then there's another note, February 14th, 1909, 622, Hermes and Diana reference to Quatrain, well, that's obscure, 2QH3, I had to research that scribble. But anyways, I had already discovered on April 1st, 1997, 8:30 a.m. The following morning, I had already discovered this verse. It's like, oh my God, I did that. And what's the verse? The great amount of silver of Diana and the moon, in parentheses, and Mercury, Hermes, in parentheses. The images will be seen in the lake, parentheses, the mind of meditation. The great amount of silver, of course, was that 187 silver pieces of glass were cut. It was a monumental effort in the last 24 hours before Plant City Art Fair. I mean, I had to cut out the patterns first. And that took me half a day. With scissors. Precisely. And then, after the patterns were cut, divide them up into the glass colors that I wanted each of the patterns to be cut out of. I was up 24 hours during that time. Now, the images will be seen in the lake, the mind of meditation. Well, there is the only reason I put a lake next to Hermes and Diana, because this is 1986. I didn't even know the scriptures of Nostradamus. But I was from the Great Lakes region, so I wanted a nice little pond next to Hermes and Diane under the oak tree. And to represent the Great Lakes. And there's the lake in the mural. Hermes and Diane, I got a shepherd boy and a woman. The woman was under the New York City World Trade Center. That was her fate. She was going to die there. Kidnapped, returned around the world, fucked all over the place, humiliated, disgraced, and then returned to New York and killed. So whoever that Brooke Shields was, as a Greek Jew, she wasn't Brooke Shields. She was just a fraud, and I had nothing to do with her. Now, the sculptor, it says here in line 3, the sculptor looking for new clay, he and his followers will be soaked in gold That's when I would create the gold machine. Now, interesting enough, that this is a prophecy that expands over 40 years. First of all, I had to go to Tyler, Texas to learn stained glass mirror at Columbus Art Glass. Then I had to go back to Michigan to develop my own industry to produce stained glass mirror that otherwise no one's going to do for me, except I do it for myself. And after creating the glass, I could sculpt all the prophecy visuals predicted by ancient scribes. And I can go over each and every one of those prophecies. I'm not going to do it right now. I've already written it. It's already public information. You just go to that Sixth Circuit Court and you can read the whole story. All the pictures included. And if they don't have it, you can hang the sons of the bitches, because I'll have other means of making sure you can access the stories. And the only thing about Motor City Sign was I didn't want anybody else to assume my authority from those mirrors. I smashed every damn one of them. I had the pictures of all of the evidence And that was all I needed. And I could smash all the mirrors. And that's what I did. There was nobody going to be duplicating me whatsoever. Now, line 3 is the sculptor looking for new clay. He and his followers will be soaked in gold. So, at Motor City Sign, while Donald Trump was kidnapping American women, 1986, out of New York City, 56,000 women get kidnapped out of New York City. While he was kidnapping American women out of New York City, I was creating Hermes and Diane by the lake, October 25th and 26th, 1986. That's while Donald Trump was kidnapping the women out of New York City. By 19 by 1987, in March, I discovered Universal Gear, as a story I just related. Then, after traveling around the country being a shooting gallery, where they tried to shoot me dead, July 15th, 1988, and the Marine officer said, I don't want to let him see me in my dress uniform. Well, I was still alive to know who was trying to shoot me dead. 4-foot range, that not very difficult. He was trying to kill me at point blank range. And then I was a shooting gallery around the country before I returned in 1988 to Michigan. And when the people said, he left Michigan, you'll never see him again. And then I came back. Yeah, I was a shooting gallery already. I could enumerate the times that they tried to shoot me dead across the United States. So when I got back to Motor City Sign, while Donald Trump was still in bed with Jeffrey Epstein kidnapping the American children, he says now, 38 years later, he had nothing to do with developing the space jet fighter. Well, what the hell did you do while you were president in 1988? Fucking women with Jeffrey Epstein as a pedophile, defending the United States when I came back to Motor City Sign, which I was corralled into. And understanding that I was under military surveillance, that I made tactical use of saying, well, I'm going to take away all this authority of all this weaponry from you to defend the American people, but at least I can give you what you need to know to defend the American people. And that's exactly what I did. You see that Superman sign? See that? That shield? That's one shield. That's on the right hand. And I got another shield just like it on the other hand. It's my left hand. It's also got a blood vein shield. Now, those are the same signets of Superman in the comic books, and it's like, well, at least I'm not going to try and fly around the earth. And then I create the space fighter jet. He said, he never created a space fighter jet. Well, while you were sleeping with Jeffrey Epstein, I was talking to military surveillance and how to create the space fighter jet to go around the world. And then the artists looking for new clay, I send them off into their adventure of South African dredging, because you got water pressure 1.5 miles, 2 miles deep, and the higher pressures would therefore go up. If you have a tube that releases the pressure, all they had to do was mix the ores that they would scrub off the ocean floor into the water, and with a tube holding its pressure envelope from 2 miles down, 1.5 miles down, up to the surface, it would force the water pressure at lower levels would pressurize and push the water up to the higher levels. All they had to do was mix in the dredging resources, and then they could spray into transports this raw resource dredged off the ocean floor, let it settle, and then drain the transports of the water, go from hole to hole to hole. Once the water, the resource has settled, drain the water, sump pumps, and then gradually collect all the resources that they were dredging off the ocean floor that were being forced up by the water pressure through the tubes into the transports. Well, that's 3 decades ago. It's like old hat for them now. They know how to do it, and it's just how many more transports can they get? How many more dredging machines, support equipment to hold the tubes in place while the dredges go down there and garble up the raw resources and spew them right into the transports from their deep submergence. They dropped the F-22 design with 400 jets and cut it off at 144. Several of them went dysfunctional and got destroyed, but they still have a number of F-22s still remaining, but that was just 400 that they projected, but they were buying that jet from foreign resources that were very expensive to buy. Now that they got this cheap resource acquisition off the floor of off the South African coast, they could build 4,000 F-35s with all those resources. Now that's a leap of imagination that they're not having to spend the excess money for costly foreign acquired resources, that they could acquire the resources cheaply by looking for new clay, here you go, another prophecy fulfilled of the verse from Motor City Sign, while Donald Trump was in bed with Jeffrey Epstein. Then the next step, of course, for the 4-decade prophecy of Century 9, Quatrain 12, his followers will be soaked in gold. Well, here comes Donald Trump into the presidency. He hadn't got a damn thing to do with the United States military. He's not defending anybody. In fact, he wants to kill the entire United States military. Well, you give a lie and they believe a lie. Just walk him into a trap. He wants all the lies he can be given to believe. So I can lie to that bastard all my life. He'll believe every one of those lies. So by 2020, 17, my friend acquired universal gear, and I was able to therefore give the information of the gold machine and how to develop gold using universal gear. And of course, the engineers were all trained on laser steel cable fiber armor, rocket motors, the engineering of rotating tank shields, rocket jet engines. But now they had the skill of how to engineer the surfaces, of which the primary effort of going after the South African resources were the diamonds. The diamonds would be the surfaces necessary inside of the gold machine. Like a butter churn for using liquid lead and liquid hydrogen under helium neutralization so that there was no explosive spark, so to speak, in the concept. Universal Gear manual says that the operations of the gearing heats up and you have to shut it down after 8 hours of operation because of the heat buildup. Well, we needed 24 hours of operation. So the helium cooling would therefore reduce the friction associated with the operation of the gears, even under high pressure and transfer of electrons and protons, so that the lead turned into gold and the hydrogen turned into a liquid into metal, and then expunged out of the machine. It's just a continuous operation. In other words, they would know the critical point in the mixture of the churning of when the material mass had changed in development into both substance, that the lead would no longer be lead but gold, and the hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, would no longer be liquid hydrogen but metastasized hydrogen metal. Now, this metastasized hydrogen metal was told by another engineer that explodes at 40,000 feet per second. At 40,000 feet per second, that meat reaches critical mass for a fissionable material. So when I built my atomic warhead at Tyler, Texas, I had another design yet to complete, creating lead to gold and liquid hydrogen and metastasized hydrogen metal that would explode at 40,000 feet per second, which would be the necessary equivalent of reaching fission with fissionable material compressed and exploded. And that's exactly what I designed at Columbus Art Glass. So I was born December 4th, 1959, still under the Eisenhower administration. Handed the baton, so to speak. The torch has been passed to a new generation. Born in peace, raised in war. Let the message go out to friend and foe alike. You have a choice. So I wasn't sitting there on that inauguration stand the following January 1960 for John Fitzgerald Kennedy, but I got the message from General Eisenhower of the industrial military complex. You need to study. Well, I picked up Eisenhower's nuclear war as a baby in the cradle, so to speak. And I'm carrying on that defense of the United States. Now, the major aspect here being that I orchestrated the military to go after the new clay off of South Africa. So that was another part of the prophecy predicted. Century 9, Quatrain 12, line 3. The identification of who was involved in all of the prophecy, of course, was Hermas and Diane by the lake, of which I had performed at Plant City Art Fair, October 25th, 26th, the day of the art fair, 1986. It took me 24 hours to cut the glass, and I was 2 hours late. They said, "You're too late for the blue ribbon." It was the greatest artwork in the history of the United States. Didn't get the blue ribbon. But at least I fulfilled the prophecy. It was 5,434 days before 9/11 from the completion of cutting that glass. That's how many days the World Trade Center had to remain to be stand from that point on. because the World Trade Center was cut into the glass, and on top of the glass was a cockpit with two red ribbons of light. The prophecy that the two jets would destroy the building. Everything I did, everything I created was prophecy. We'll go into that aspect of why didn't you warn us? Well, I was writing out the World Trade Center attack at the exact moment the World Trade Center was being attacked. No television, no radio, nothing. I was just writing it in a book. Predated it to Michigan before I even left Michigan. And later that day, went to sleep, woke up late, went into work, late waiting for a 3-day suspension to be given to me because this would be the third day I was late. And discovered that day that the World Trade Center had actually been attacked. That's when I ended the book. They won't believe me unless I just stop this book immediately and never write another page. Of course, I've been assaulted all my life. No one give a damn about me and warnings or prophecy. And here's an event that I wrote about exactly at the moment it was occurring. It wouldn't be till later when I got back home at after 4 a.m. or 4 p.m., 5:30, that I'd turn on the television and I'd see all the video of the events in the morning that were occurring while I was writing about the event as it happened. And it's like, I was so disgusted that I could actually write the same story at the immediate point in time without warning those people and save their life. You know, George Bush came down to Bradenton, Florida. If he had woke me up at 7 a.m. in the morning and said, "What are you going to do?" Well, I'm going to write about their story about they're going to attack the World Trade Center. What would have happened differently? I already announced to him that I was the Lord God Almighty Christ St. Peter Gregory Allen McCowan, August 5th, 2000. So here he's in Bradenton, Florida. Why didn't he come to my door and say, "What do I need to know if you're the Lord God Almighty?" Well, I'm going to write a book about World Trade Center being struck. That alone could have changed the dynamics of the future. He could have stopped all aerial flights immediately. The terrorists would never have gotten the opportunity to perform their assault. But for me, that ended that book. I couldn't write any more in that book. It's like it literally broke my heart. That was just the third part of Codename Alabama. Hell, the war was already going on across the United States. In my first two books, Codename Alabama, America's Last August Battle Against the Military Aggression. And this is only the third book, and I was writing the excuse for the war was the destruction of the World Trade Center. And that's what it developed into the future of 20 years of war in the Middle East. From George Walker Bush to Barack Obama, into Donald Trump. The waste of another generation of American youth. Sacrifice and suffer. That couldn't be more disgusting. I had years to wait until my engineering tutoring at Motor City Sign was completed as McMurray Creations, redesigning universal gear. And in that concept, I couldn't tell anybody about the universal gear would become the gold machine, or else Dennis wouldn't be able to acquire the company by his family relations. And it's a long story cut short. The sister of Natalie Merrill was the mistress of the owner of Universal Gear. Well, Natalie was in Florida with her sister of the owner of Universal Gear. I was in South Washington with Dennis in 1984. my final semester at Michigan State University. 0.1. Declare myself the Son of God, and I get 0.1. Well, you're number one as far as you're concerned. Yeah, well, you got that correct. Took 160 books out of the Michigan University Library on Religion, perused them all. For my understanding of the world religions, all of them take themselves to be innocent before proven guilty. So I wrote a cryptic paper for Michigan State University on my studies before I returned all the books, of course. I wasn't stealing anything. Declaring myself the Son of God, and that's not going to happen without blood. And they've been trying to kill my blood ever since. So they have their chance, they have their choice. Their freedom to be free under a God that would be the master of the world as the rod of iron over all nations, and yet I would serve all those people in my wealth. Donald Trump wants to make you all prisoners of war and slaves. I guess that's enough to say that he's going to be impeached by April 30th, 2026. So, anyways, the final verb in century 9, quatrain 12, century 9, quatrain 12, his followers will be soaked in gold. Now here's Jimmy Carter. He makes the anti-neutron bomb treaty. Now, what a neutron bomb does is it can kill the occupants, but not damage the vehicles. In other words, they can take over your equipment, kill you and take over your equipment. Now, the only way that this could be stopped is, of course, a shield. And what would be the shield? The gold machine. Bear Paints and other companies that can make metallic gold metal paints. They take my gold machine, they take the gold out of the gold machine, they put it in the paints, spray their uniforms, they're all soaked in gold. So here's the United States Military Command, September 30th, 2025, brought in from all around the world by Donald Trump. Guess what I do? I tell them all, you're all going to be soaked in gold. "40 years, and there's the prophecy." Oh, that's the light. We're in the evening time. The sun's coming through the window, and that's the light that you see across here, coming through the shades. Anyways, he brought in all the commanders from around the world, and then with Nostradamus being identified in Century 9, Quadrant 12, creating Hermes and Diane by the lake, many little silver pieces, his followers will be looking for new clay, searching for raw resources off the South African coast by dredging. They'll all be soaked in gold because later, by 2017, when my friend finally acquired Universal Gear without my divulging that that was the gold machine, that I could tell them they could take all their diamonds from their South African dredging, put it into the gold Universal Gear surfaces, and create gold and metastasized hydrogen metal for atomic warheads, atomic ammunition. The Eisenhower baby just came of age. If the Nuclear Regulatory Agency couldn't stop Eisenhower from building atomic weapons, there's no nuclear regulatory agency of the United Nations that's going to stop me from building atomic weapons. Of course, several years ago, I told all the states, welcome to the nuclear club. Oh my. That sunlight has a lot to do with me. And then look at that. God has his way of seeing me, one way or another. Well, I told those commanders in a short message after and when they were still assembled, and I had completed the story of my life, which they obviously downloaded. I couldn't stop them from doing that. That I addressed them, heard a comment out of the crowd, and wrote it down. Let them know that even though I was in Houston, Texas, I could still hear them. Gave them a briefing on the future, 20 minutes of writing Didn't have to sit them down for 2 hours and berate them for any reason. They were defending their own life and they're defending mine. My self-sacrifice was to serve their self-sacrifice. And they understood, unlike Donald Trump, that I was unselfish. And nothing makes me jealous. I'm going to live forever. I don't care what you believe. I don't have to know you when you don't. And that fulfilled 40 years of prophecy out of one verse of Nostradamus, from identifying me to creating the gold machine, that I would paint them with gold in their uniforms. They would all be soaked in gold, anti-radiation, anti-neutron. In other words, even though Donald Trump or Jimmy Carter outlawed the neutron bomb, didn't stop our enemy from creating neutron bombs. That when the men are painted in gold, no neutron bomb is going to kill them. And the answer to the question of who are the followers of the verse of Century 9, Quatrain 12, his followers will be soaked in gold. The answer came September 30th, 2025, and there's the entire military. I'm going to paint you in gold. Donald Trump is saying, this is the golden age. I'm going to be the dictator and you're going to surrender to me or I'll fire you. Give me a break. He's going to tell Americans, you're fired. You can't defend yourself. He's a freaking idiot. And everybody knows it. And so I've gone over the presentation of We the People signing a petition, creating Article 5 Assembly, that they can impeach the entire government of the United States if they don't consider the Constitution that I gave them to perform, to save their life. They're nothing but a bunch of cowards, traitors. Otherwise, a government of kidnapping, treason. The American people have a right to defend themselves, with or without their consent. And there's Donald Trump. That military doesn't have their consent to defend themselves. I can fire them. Yeah, you go right ahead and fire your military from defending you. And the reality is, they won't be defending him because they'll have a new president April 30th, 2026. And he'll scream, "Insurrection! I can kill the American people committing insurrection against my government." And what's that? You're going to kidnap 270 million Americans. You're going to kidnap them by who? Who's going to kidnap the United States? Donald Trump? Or 66 million idiots that think they're communists to say, "We'll kill you if you don't surrender"? Well, now you know the Civil War without mercy. They're going to kill you if you don't surrender. If you do surrender, they'll kill you anyways. So when you take them prisoner, you just shoot them dead and move on to the next communist to be killed, because you're not babysitting any prisoners. That's the rules of war. There are no rules of war. Survival, victory, life, freedom. The service of God, country, and your own posterity. I've sacrificed my entire life for that reality, and God gave me His blessing to perform it. I went through the prophecy, one prophecy verse, over 40 years. And here I'm telling the United States assembled, you're all going to be spray painted in gold. Of course, I let them know life is more valuable than all the gold I could give them to be spray painted. Spare no expense in saving their life. Now I gotta end this. Now, I've already told you you can go into the archives, either Houston Chronicles or even the Sixth Circuit Court in Pontiac, Michigan, to get the entire records, because Article 4, public records, are to be shared through all the nation and all the states. They have that responsibility to fulfill and perform for the American people, to read all my literature. If you don't agree with it, well, the people that don't agree with it have been trying to kill me for 45 years. Just understand how many millions of Americans they did kill, and they want to complete their killing of the United States as if it's their destiny to destroy the American people as a foreign ideology that has no concept of humanity whatsoever in their barbarity to perform their destruction of life. There's your rules of war. You have no conscious guilt to destroy them, despising an oath of God. George Washington made the Constitution with an oath of God. Now you have it. Amen, and God bless you, and be thou bulletproof. I'm going to end this. I have fulfilled my duty before God.